We are starting a series in the book of James entitled Authentic Faith. Authentic is a word that's thrown around a lot in today's culture. People want authentic coffee and authentic shoes, and we want an authentic faith, though. If anything's going to be authentic, it ought to be our faith, right? So we have a series we're looking at in the book of James called Authentic Faith. And James, verse 1 says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. The James that wrote this book is thought to be the James that is referred to in Galatians 1, the James who was the brother of Jesus, the James that wasn't saved until after the resurrection, and Jesus paid this James a special visit. And this book of James was written probably the earliest book in the New Testament. So no gospel was written down, no other epistle by Paul, nothing else, just this book, first one. And James felt it necessary as a pillar of the first church in Jerusalem, as a leader there, as a preacher and teacher in the church of Jerusalem. He felt it important to codify and write down the expectations of, if we're going to walk this way, which it was called that early in Acts, it was referred to as the way. He says, if you're going to be in the way, then you need to behave and believe in a certain way, and he wrote it down. So we're really striking at the heart of the Christian faith when we read the book of James. In verse 1 it says, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. The dispersion originally means to disperse. Originally it was in the Old Testament when the Jews, Israel was conquered and the Jews were sent out everywhere, and there was a coming back after they regained the kingdom. And then at this time in the New Testament, they were there, and the spiritual Jews, so to speak, which were still primarily just Jewish heritage Hebrews, they converted to Christianity. And then remember Stephen, the deacon, was stoned, and then they spread out again. There was this Christian dispersion. And that's made clear in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, and in Acts chapter 11, verse 19, where it says that because of persecution, they were spread throughout all the region and as far as certain particular locations. And so Christians had to relocate because the circumstances they were presented with were so severe. And so James felt it necessary to write to these people and say, listen, you converted from Old Testament Hebrew faith to this new way. And now as you've been walking this new way, you've faced trials and you've faced hardship, so much so that you've had to flee your homes. And I just don't want you to think that that's evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's not. God has planned this. It's for your good. And that's why he jumps in verse 2. The very first thing he says is, so really you can look at this as the first recorded words, the first command that the New Testament church received in writing, count it all joy, my brothers. And so what I want to look at this morning is 4 commands to obey while you are enduring trial. 4 commands to obey while you're enduring trial. And these are salvific commands, meaning this is, you obey these commands while you are enduring trial, and it will redeem the situation. God will pull out and produce the most out of this situation for you if you obey these commands. And the first one is to choose joy. Choose joy. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. Now, I mentioned this in worship, and it's important. It's worth repeating. The fact that this is a command to choose joy, to count it as joy. The word count means to consider, to regard, to reckon. It literally means the idea to lead someone along in a supervisory manner. So you lead. So we have the command to lead our hearts to joy in times of trial. And the fact that this command here is indication that this is not a natural reaction when we find ourselves in any kind of trial. There's trials of all various kinds. Some of them are great suffering. Some of them are just perplexities. But whatever trial you're in, it usually does not result in joy naturally. In fact, if it does result in joy, I question you more than I question you if you struggle with joy. But it's a command we must obey nonetheless. We have a command to fight for joy when we're in the midst of trial. It's not a natural reaction. There's nothing wrong with you if it's not. This is not just an observation of normal processes. We have to go counter to what is natural. We have to go above what is natural. We have to go supernatural. We have to choose joy. I would like you to notice also, in obedience to this command, this is not in conflict with grief. It's not like you have to choose between joy or grief. If you just turn the page if you want, or you can look up on the screen, 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 6, it says, chapter 1 of 1 Peter is almost very, very similar message to chapter 1 in James. In chapter 1 and verse 6 of 1 Peter, it says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials." You don't have to abandon your grief to find joy in the suffering or in the trial. Both of those can abide at once. Another passage, 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 10. Paul's testimony was, hey, we're regarded as being killed and yet we still live. We are regarded as sorrowful yet always rejoicing. By all appearances, you look at us and we look like sorrowful people, but we are always rejoicing. So, receive the full weight of your trial. Don't deny it, but receive the fullness of your joy as well. He says, "Count it all joy, my brothers." All joy. Not joy in part, not joy in partial measure, but all joy. And as the full weight of whatever it is you're suffering, you receive it, you'll also have, if you obey these commands, the fullness of joy supporting you from underneath. Where does this joy come from? Well, this joy comes from faith within, looking forward to what is to come. And if we're just to really cast our eyes through this passage really quickly and looking ahead through the sermon, we see why we should have joy in our suffering. In verse 4, we see that there is a destination at the end of this suffering or at the end of this trial. There is a destination where you lack nothing. Do you see that in verse 4? "Let your steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." That's a good place to be, to lack nothing, isn't it? I mean, if you were Bill Gates right now and anything in the world was yours to purchase, what would you get? And when you got it, you would say, okay, now I lack nothing. We have this natural desire to want more and more. And God isn't promising you everything you want, but He is promising you everything you need. And we need to distinguish between the two. Last Saturday, I can't remember when, I went to the store and I had Lainey and Jackson with me, and I asked if they wanted to come into the store with me to pick up some groceries. And Lainey declined. And I reminded her, I'm only going to be alive for so long, Lainey, and then I'll be gone. I want that guilt to set in when I'm gone for her. She chose to stay in the car. But Jackson came in with me, didn't you, Jackson? And he was anxious. He just wanted something. I don't know why, but he wanted to get something in the checkout line. We were there for like milk, I think, and water. And he kept asking, "Can I get this? Can I get this?" I said, no. "Can I get this?" No. And as we got closer and closer to the checkout line, he got more and more desperate. "What about this? Why do you want a flash drive? You don't need this." Until finally he's reaching for Dentine gun. Please, give me this." And I refused him because I'm a good parent. Why? Well, because he had everything he needed. Not everything he wanted, but everything he needed. And we can plead and cajole for what we want, but we recognize this, that we have joy in knowing that through this trial, even though it's not the path we would have chosen, the end destination is that we have all that we need, lacking nothing, according to verse 4. And so we count it as joy. We see also, as we look in verse 5, not only is the trial end in a destination where we lack nothing, but the trial itself is a place of fulfilled dependency upon God. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. This place where we come to God and we commune with him, we express our need, we depend on him, and he reciprocates. He gives to us what we need. A place of fulfilled dependency. That should give us some joy. I would rather have a trial and know that God is all that I need than to have everything that I want and not realize that God is present, or not have an awareness of my need for God. A place of fulfilled dependency on God brings us joy. And also, as we scan ahead and we look at verse 12, it says, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him." We take joy in the trial. We set our hearts, we count it as joy, and we lead our hearts into joy because we know that we are loved by God, that we love God, and that all of this is going to work together to bless us. Blessing from God. And that 7 little word, blessing, what does it mean? It means that God is smiling upon you. God is prospering you according to his ways. God is giving you wisdom. It means God is securing you. God is with you, that you are not shaken. God is blessing you. So we're going to look at all of those in a little more detail. But right now we just recognize, okay, it's going to take faith because in the moment I don't feel joyful. But I need to count it as joy, as all joy because of these trials. First command, choose joy. Second command we see in verse 3 and 4. Not only are we to choose joy, but we are to remain consistent. Now last week I had some younger kids help me, and I'd like to see if we can get some more help. Caleb Court, can you help me out? Ask your buddies there. Is this their first time here? Do you guys want to come down and help me out with something? You get to show off how strong you are. You want to do it? All right, come on down. That was a solid yes. And let's see, we got 3, and I need one more young person that's kind of like a judge maybe. Let's see. Any Wilson boys want to come down and help out? Yes? No? Laney? Anybody? I could ask. There's some younger kids back there. I see someone pointing. Come on down. Come on. All right. So, let's see. Line up strongest to weakest real quick, will you? Come back this way just a little bit in the light. All right. I pulled out some weights from the closet. 3-pounders. These are Rachel's, not mine. Hang on to that. 5-pounders. Hang on to that. Now this is only 25 pounds. This I inherited with my house when I bought the house 5 years ago, and you guys are going to watch the first time it has ever been used. So there you go. Hang on to that. Okay, now you need to stand right here, and all right, guys, set your weights down just for a second, and hold your arms out straight like this. Straight, parallel. That's not straight. There we go. All right, so your job, see how straight their arms are like that? They need to stay like that. And if they fall below parallel at all, you need to just tap them on the shoulder, and they need to set the weights down, okay? Grab your weights, guys. Arms to parallel right now. Okay, now, whenever they go below parallel, you just tap them, and they can set it down. We'll see if they can last as long as my sermon point. This just point in the sermon goes, what are you doing? You know what you're supposed to do, right? Get it out there. Get it. There you go. All right, second chance for him. All right, we'll see if they can last at the end of this point. Why do I say this? Because it says that we are to remain consistent. You know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Steadfastness is consistency, endurance, patience, fortitude. Don't lean back on that. Stand up straight, guys. Now, over time, small weights begin to feel heavy. Heavy weights are even heavier. And so that's what Rachel was talking about when she said, do not belittle whatever trial you're facing. It may seem little, but the longer you try to hold that weight on your own, the heavier it gets. Why do you keep leaning back? Please stand up straight. Thank you. These are only 3-pound weights, but you know what? If you hold them long enough like that, the strongest man in the world wouldn't even be able to hold a pencil, because over time they get heavier and heavier and heavier. And it's God who comes. He sees my shaking hands and my white knuckles, and he says, here, you're not designed to hold on to this. Let me carry it for you. Thank you, guys. You want to give them a hand as they sit down? You're not designed to carry that weight on your own. But you need to be steadfast in faith in what God is producing through this trial, because small weights become heavy over time, heavy weights become heavier. Whatever the trial is, some people may have a heavier trial than yours, but whatever it is, God is intentionally using it in your life to produce a sanctified effect. So don't belittle it. Don't ignore it. Don't think this is too little a thing for me to bring to God in prayer. You need to remain consistent in your faith because God is using that trial. Now notice this. As we continue with this thought of remaining consistent in whatever trial you're facing right now, what does remaining consistent look like? 3 things. Remaining consistent means not doubting. Let's jump down to verses 6 through 8 and see that. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. If you're going to remain consistent in trial, that means you're not going to doubt. The word doubt literally means divided. First you're thinking one way, then you're thinking another. At one moment you think God is in it, and at the other you're frustrated. Don't be double-minded. Don't be divided. He says it's like a wave of the sea, unstable and going back and forth. I knew an old sailor a long time ago, and he told stories about when he was in the Navy and when the storms were really rough. And he said there was times where he was on a ship I don't know what, I guess the old times they'd call it a crow's nest. I don't know what they call it anymore. 60 feet above the water. And a storm was enough that he could touch one end of the water on this side and come all the way over here, and the ship would rock, and he'd touch the water on this side. And he was going back and forth and unstable. And God says, that's what it looks like when you're doubting. And you're saying, yes, God is in this, and I love him, and why is this happening to me? And I can get through this. I'm strong enough. And then weeping because you can. He says, don't do that. If you're consistent in the trial, it means you're not doubting. Because there's nothing good comes from those who doubt. Not doubting, not blaming. Look at verse 13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. Now we mentioned this in the worship too, and this is critical. You need to understand this, because just keep in mind a couple passages. One that I would ask you to write down next to this point is Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1, where it says that Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit to be tempted by Satan. That word tempted, the word here tested, same exact word. And God is not tempting you to sin. He's testing you to prove your righteousness. He's testing you to strengthen you, to bring about some good benefit in the end. But do not blame God for the terrible things that are happening. He's not doing it to harm you. He's doing it to help you. We see in verse 16, do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. What does that mean? It means he's trying to create a living sacrifice with your life, and he's not casting you out ahead where he's never gone. Remember what we looked at last week in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 10, where Jesus was the pioneer of our faith. He was blazing the trail for us, walking ahead, and it says this, that Jesus was perfected in suffering, meaning that who he was. It was completed. Like he wouldn't have been Jesus. He couldn't have been our Savior if he hadn't suffered at all. And we're just following in that path. And that is a good thing that comes from God. To remain consistent means no doubting, no blaming, and no sinning. Not sinning either. We see this in 14 and 15. God puts us in a situation to steel our faith, to strengthen us, to work into us his character. In that exact same situation, however, there's the option to sin, and it doesn't come from God. That option comes from within. Each person is tempted, in verse 14, when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So we see this kind of horror movie image of this identity inside of us that sees the opportunity to sin. It's a desire, a seedling, and as it grows, we give into it, and we follow those desires, and that leads to sin, and that sin matures in our life until it kills us. But if we're to remain consistent in trial, it means no doubting, no blaming, no sinning. We stay on the path. And back to verse 4, where we started with this train of thought, it says, "And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." If you're going to get the good things out of the time of trial and suffering, it's dependent on you remaining consistent. Because only when that steadfastness has its full effect, after you've been steadfast, patient, enduring, unwavering, then you begin to reap the benefits of it. So it's very important as we look at these commands, these redemptive, sanctifying commands that we must obey during times of trial. We must choose joy. We must remain consistent. And notice I've kept all of these as just really short phrases. I've never personally given birth, but I've seen my wife give birth several times, and they tell me to tell her to breathe. Like when she's giving birth, I'm holding her hand, and I'm saying, breathe, breathe, breathe. Why am I giving her that command? She knows to breathe, right? It would be hard not to breathe in those situations, but she just wants an easy reminder, a simple command under great duress when my mind is addled because of my suffering. Just be here with me and hold me and just give me some direction to go. Breathe, push, breathe, push. And so I've kept these commands very short so that in your time of duress, even if your mind is addled with grief or confusion, even in the suffering, you can remember these 4 very short commands. Choose joy. Remain consistent. Third one, seek wisdom. Seek wisdom. Look at verse 5. "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him." The wisdom you need will be given to you, but you got to ask God. Now, I'm all for getting advice from other people. I'm all for gleaning information from more mature believers and for studying out and getting books from the Christian bookstore on Main Street and studying these truths out. But if you really want wisdom, why not go right to the source? We have a promise here that you, whoever you are, you can go to God and say, "Lord, I need wisdom in this circumstance. Will you give it to me?" And He will. Sometimes it feels better in times of trial to be busy and be seeking wisdom from different sources and talk to someone and just hash it all out and put it all out there on the table. What do I do next? And that's good. Those have their place. But do not neglect to go to the Lord and ask for wisdom from Him and just say, "Lord, I'm in this situation and I need wisdom to see why I'm here. I need wisdom to know how to grow through this. I need wisdom to depend on you. I need a new perspective in this." Just go to God in faith and pray, and He will give you the wisdom. Wisdom is the proper application of knowledge. Knowledge properly applied to the situation. So for some of you younger kids, this was a verse I had memorized as a kid, and when I didn't study for a test, invariably I would take that step of faith right before the test, and I would pray, Lord, you've promised to give wisdom to anyone who wants it, so give me wisdom in this moment. And that is not at all what this is saying. This is saying, I'm going to give you wisdom in times of trial, in times of distress. I'm going to give you wisdom to know how to handle it, how to walk through it, how to choose joy, how to remain consistent. Now, this next statement I think is true. To some of you, this will be humbling. To some of you, it will be encouraging. Here it is. There is no correlation between intelligence and wisdom. None at all. There are some very intelligent people in the world that are foolish. And there are some very simple-minded people in the world that have divine wisdom. There's no correlation between intelligence and wisdom. Ask for God and He will give you wisdom. He will prepare you for the circumstance you find yourself in. How does He give it? He'll give it generously and without reproach. Generously, liberally, bountifully. He's not going to crack open a little tuna can of wisdom and give it to you. He's going to prepare a spread, a giant Thanksgiving dinner, ready for you to belly up to, and says, here's all the wisdom you could possibly need. You've asked for it, now I'm going to give it. So make sure you ask for it. He gives it liberally, generously, and He gives it without reproach. Do you see that in verse 5? That means He's not disappointed in you when you ask for wisdom. He's not going to go, you should have the wisdom by now, Cindy. He's not going to do that. He's going to say, I'm glad you asked. Let me give it to you. He's not going to be begrudging. He's not going to chide you. And sometimes we feel like that, don't we? We feel like, I should have learned this lesson already at this point in my life. Why? I feel bad having to come and ask for wisdom. I feel bad asking God to bail me out. God wants you to come to Him and ask. And if you ask for wisdom, not only will He give it to you in full measure, but He'll be glad you came and asked for it. So, 3 commands so far. Choose joy, remain consistent, seek wisdom, and the final one, we see in verse 9, keep perspective. Keep perspective. Let's look at verses 9 through 12. 9 says, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, and its flowers fall, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. We're going to be covering this topic of wealth later on in the book of James, but in this instance, I think the main thing that we need to take out of this is the fact that death is the great equalizer. And we need to keep perspective of no matter how difficult or easy life is right now, this is true, that life is short and eternity is long. The most we could hope for on this earth, I mean, if you're really ambitious, is what, 110 years? And that's it. And then it's done. Our flesh will give out. We will all find ourselves in the grave. But eternity lasts forever. And if we can keep that perspective in the times of our trial and recognize God is working about something through this difficulty in my life right now to prepare me for eternity, I can handle it. I can endure it because I know that there's something better on the other end, and what comes next is so much longer than what trial I'm enduring right now. Life is short, eternity is long. Another thing to keep in perspective is verse 12. Everyone look at verse 12. We're going to be closing with this thought. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, when he stood it, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him. So there's trial that you're enduring. Maybe it's so heavy you don't think you can handle it. Maybe it's so light you think, I got this. Either way, you need to go to God. You need to choose joy. You need to seek wisdom from God. You need to remain consistent. And the perspective you need to keep is this: blessing is coming if I remain steadfast under this trial. I'm going to receive a crown of life. This reminds me of a very similar passage. I'm going to turn here and read this to you, and then we'll be done. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 8 through 11. Here, God sends a message to a church that is suffering trials and tribulations. He says, to the church in Smyrna, the words of the first and the last, the one who died and came to life. So he's just saying, I know what suffering's about. I know your tribulation also, and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say they are righteous and are not. They're really the synagogue of Satan. Here's my message to you. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw you into prison, that you may be tested for 10 days. You will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear. Keep that perspective. Death might come, but life comes after. I'm going to learn what I need to learn to endure for eternity. And so we're going to close with this song, and I ask you to stand. It's called Always. And I encourage you to sing this song with faith and with confidence. I encourage you to hold your ground in the midst of this rising storm that you find yourself in. To stand your ground without fear, trusting in the promise of a God who offers refuge and strength and help without delay. In abounding chaos and trouble, I encourage you to rest your soul in a God who promises to come through for you always. So we lift our eyes, we lift our voices to Him from whom our help comes.